November 12, 1944. RAF Woodbridge, England. Visibility, 100 feet. Fog so thick it swallowed sound. Out of the gray came a dying B-17 Flying Fortress, tail number 42 to 31,407. No hydraulics. One engine gone. Landing gear stuck halfway. And in the cockpit, First Lieutenant Thomas Crawford faced a decision no manual covered. Land backwards, or let 8 men die. The control tower erupted in panic. Crawford, negative. Abort. Abort. His voice came back over the radio, flat, calm, final. Tower, I'm out of options. Wheels won't lock. I'm coming in tail first. Silence. Then, Crawford, you're insane. You'll cartwheel. Maybe, Crawford said. But my crew walks away. In the next 4 minutes, Crawford would rewrite emergency landing procedures for every Allied Air Force, starting with the most dangerous decision a pilot could make, to ignore everything he'd ever been taught and fly into the fog backwards. Crawford was from Montana, where winter fog rolled through valleys like slow rivers. His father flew crop dusters, low to the ground, no instruments, no second chances. You learned to trust instinct or you didn't fly long. Crawford grew up in that cockpit. By 22, he had 800 hours in the logbook. By 24, he was flying B-17s over Germany. His crew called him Backwards Tom, not because of flying, but poker. He played reverse odds. Folded strong hands, raised on junk. Read people by what they didn't do. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Mike Jennings, once asked him why. Crawford just said, "Everybody expects you to play forward. Sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming." November 12th started like any other mission. Pre-dawn briefing. Target, the Merseburg oil refineries, deep inside Germany. 824 B-17s. Over 3,000 fighters escorting. Crawford's crew had flown 27 missions together. Just 3 more, and they'd go home. They were careful now. Not cautious. Careful, like men who knew how to survive when the odds said they wouldn't. Takeoff, 5:47. Formation over the North Sea. Crawford's B-17, christened Rocky Mountain High, slotted into the high squadron. Everything by the book. Jennings on radios. Navigator Dan Morrison tracking waypoints. Engineer Frank Delgado watching fuel flow. Ball turret gunner Eddie Kowalski squeezed into his glass bubble underneath. Waist gunners Tommy Liu and Carl Henderson at the side windows. Tail gunner Marcus Washington in the rear. Radio operator Bill Ollie cycling frequencies. Bombardier James Sterling prepping the Norden bomb site. 9 men, plus Crawford. They trusted him because he didn't panic. Not when flak burst close. Not when fighters broke formation. He flew smooth. Precise. Like he was reading a book only he could see. They crossed into Germany at 14,000 feet. Cloud cover thick below. Intelligence said light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. At 8:47, 50 miles from the target, the sky erupted. BF-109s dove through the bomber stream like wolves. Cannon fire stitching the sky. B-17s fell in flames. Crawford's squadron took the first hit at 8:51. The bomber ahead of them exploded in midair, debris spinning through the formation. Crawford banked hard right, missing the wreckage by 30 feet. Then came the flak. Black bursts clawing at the sky, screaming metal and fire. Fighters, 6 o'clock. Kowalski shouted from the ball turret. Washington opened up with twin 50s. Tracers arced into the air. A Focke-Wulf 190 rolled inverted and dove straight at them. Liu raked it from the waist gun, bullets walking across its wing route. The German fighter disintegrated in midair. 2 more came behind it. Crawford shoved the yoke forward, dropped 500 feet in 3 seconds. The crew slammed against their restraints, but it worked. The German fighters overshot and peeled away. "Good flying, Skipper," Jennings said, barely above a whisper. Crawford didn't answer. Crawford's eyes scanned the skies ahead, counting B-17s in formation. 4 were gone, lost in less than 2 minutes. Burning wreckage still falling from altitude. The mission was unraveling. At 0912 hours, they reached the initial point, the turn toward the bomb run. From here on, no evasive action. Straight and level flight, no matter what came. In the nose, Navigator Dan Morrison called out the final headings. Left 10, steady, hold this course. Bombardier James Sterling activated the Norden bomb site. Crawford steadied the controls. his hands light, deliberate. From this point forward, the bombardier owned the aircraft. That was the rule. The flak intensified. Black bursts erupted at precise altitude. The Luftwaffe gunners had zeroed them in. Shrapnel sliced through the aluminum skin like razor wire. The sound was overwhelming, a rolling thunder that swallowed the engines. Crawford felt impacts vibrate through the floorboards. Small hits. Manageable. Then came the one that wasn't. A flak shell detonated directly beneath them. The aircraft lurched violently, thrown upward like a leaf in wind. In the belly of the bomber, shrapnel ripped through the bomb bay. Hydraulic lines burst. Red fluid sprayed across the catwalk like arterial blood. Sergeant Frank Delgado, the engineer, shouted from his panel. Hydraulics gone. Pressure falling fast. Crawford checked the gauge. 0. No brakes. No landing gear control. No flaps. The gear might drop from gravity, maybe, but it wouldn't lock. And if the wheels didn't lock, landing meant cartwheeling down a wet runway at 120 knots. And they still had to drop their bombs. Bombs away. Sterling's voice cracked through the chaos. The fortress surged upward as 4,000 pounds of ordnance fell free, tumbling toward the Merseburg oil refinery below. Crawford pulled gently left, easing the aircraft out of the bomb run, rejoining what remained of the formation. But the punishment didn't stop. At 0924, a flak burst hit engine number 4. Direct strike. The engine exploded. Shrapnel, flame, smoke. A violent bloom of destruction. The propeller spun free for a second, then froze. Crawford feathered it. Killed the drag. 3 engines left. Barely flyable now. But they were still airborne. 7 minutes later, 0931, crossing back over the German frontier, a burst of cannon fire from a pursuing Bf-109 chewed across the right wing. Fuel tanks ruptured. Aviation gas sprayed from the holes like torn arteries. Inside the radio room, Sergeant Bill Ollie worked quickly, transferring fuel from the right tanks to the left, trying to balance the load, trying to buy them time. But the fortress was bleeding. They were losing fuel at 20 gallons per minute. Co-pilot Mike Jennings ran the numbers in his head. Skipper, we're not going to make it back to England. Crawford already knew. The question wasn't whether they'd make it. It was where to fall short. Ditch in open water. Crash land in occupied territory. Or risk one final approach into England. With no hydraulics, minimal fuel, and fog so thick it erased the world. 10:47 hours. They crossed the channel. England lay ahead, but the sky had vanished. Fog had rolled in from the North Sea. Thick, wet, smothering. Visibility was down to nothing. A wall of gray. Crawford dropped into the clouds, flying on instruments only. 5,000 feet then. For exactly 12 seconds, they broke through. Below them, green fields, a ribbon of coastline, then another cloud bank. Gone. Swallowed by fog again. No horizon. No reference. Just the numbers on the dials. Crawford kept flying. Woodbridge Tower, this is Rocky Mountain High. Declaring emergency. Hydraulics gone. Landing gear unstable. Visibility 0. Request immediate clearance. A beat of silence. Then the controller came back, voice tight. Rocky Mountain, divert to Manston. Better visibility there. Crawford shook his head. Negative tower. Fuel critical. One approach only. Request foam on runway. Another pause. Copy that. Foam trucks deploying. Wind is calm. Visibility 100 feet. You're cleared for emergency approach. Runway 27. Crawford dropped lower. 800 feet. The fog remained, a solid wall outside the glass. For 100 feet. Then, runway lights. Jennings shouted. Dim orange glows pierced the mist, barely visible. Crawford made a minor correction. Adjusted heading. Held steady. Then the warning horn screamed. Landing gear down, but red lights. Not locked. The wheels had dropped from gravity, but they weren't secured. Gears down but unsafe, Delgado confirmed. They'll collapse on contact. Crawford's options narrowed. A belly landing would shear the bomber across a quarter-mile of pavement. Maybe it would slide. Maybe it would cartwheel. A bailout. Not in this fog. Half the crew would never find the ground in time. Try landing on unlocked gear. The wheels would fold, and they'd tumble like a stone at 100 knots. Then Crawford remembered Montana. Winter fog. His father's crop duster. The impossible maneuver he'd seen once, never forgotten. A reverse landing, tail first. He keyed the mic. Tower, I'm going to try something. Go ahead, Rocky Mountain. Crawford's voice was flat, unshaken, like he was calling in a coffee order. I'm reversing approach. Coming in tail first. Silence. Then, say again, Rocky Mountain. Tail first approach, Crawford repeated. I'll fly backwards. Touch down on the tail wheel. Let the nose settle. Let the main gear hit last. Minimal impact. Less chance of collapse. Crawford, that's insane. You'll cartwheel. Maybe, he said. But it's our only shot. He didn't wait for permission. 200 feet. Crawford pulled power. Airspeed dropped to 90 knots. The bomber grew soft on the controls. Heavy, unresponsive, floating. He eased the rudder. The aircraft drifted sideways. The tail swung around. They were no longer flying forward. Now they flew backward. Nose canted 30 degrees off-center. Tail leading. Everybody brace. Crawford's voice was calm on the intercom. We're landing backwards. No one questioned it. Not after 27 missions under Crawford's command. If he said fly backwards, they flew backwards. In the tail turret, Sergeant Washington had the best view. Skipper, I see the approach lights. We're drifting left. Crawford corrected with rudder. The bomber slid sideways through the fog, a fortress in defiance of every known law of flight. Nose forward into clean air. Tail aimed at the runway. Flying not by aerodynamics anymore, but pure physics. 100 feet. The tail wheel met the foam. Not a crash. Not an impact. A kiss. Crawford held the yoke steady. Neutral. Hands like stone. The fuselage settled onto the runway. Tail first. Riding a sheet of foam like a sled on snow. Friction bit. Momentum dropped. 30 knots. 20. The nose eased down. Main wheels made contact and held. They groaned, bent, but did not collapse. The bomber rolled 200 feet more, then stopped. Just the idle hum of engines and the hiss of foam burning off heat. Jennings looked at him. You just landed a B-17 backwards. Crawford shut down the engines. Yeah, he said. Let's not do that again. The tower came back, voice shaking. Rocky Mountain High. You are down. Emergency cruise en route. That was... I don't even have words for that. Crawford reached for the mic. His hands were still. Always still. Tower, we're shutting down. Crew walking out. And they did. All 9 men. Crawford first. Then Jennings. Then the rest. They stood together in the fog, silent, staring at the aircraft that had defied gravity, protocol, and death. A flying fortress, sitting tail first on a runway, nose angled skyward at 20 degrees. Bent gear. Foam steaming around the wings. Delgado looked at it, then laughed. A short chuckle at first. Then something deeper. Something uncontrollable. Lou joined in first. Then Henderson. And then, like something breaking loose, the entire crew began laughing. Not hysterical. Not yet. Just the quiet, breathless laughter of men who realized they were alive when they shouldn't be. Fog wrapped around them. Foam hissed against hot metal. The bomber sat backwards on the runway like it belonged there. Then came the trucks. Fire crews. Medics. Ground personnel. They surged through the mist, expecting fire, wreckage, scattered bodies. Instead, they found 9 airmen standing beside a backwards B-17, laughter in their throats and disbelief in their eyes. And in the middle of it all, Lieutenant Thomas Crawford. Calm, quiet, expression unreadable. Like he'd just parked a car. The crowd parted. Colonel Richard Hayes, base commander, marched forward. He looked at the aircraft, then at Crawford, then back again. Lieutenant, did you just land tail first? Yes, sir. That's impossible. Apparently not, sir. Hayes stared at him for a beat, then smiled. You just rewrote the manual, Crawford. I don't know whether to court-martial you or give you a medal. Crawford didn't blink. I'll take the medal, sir. And the laughter came again, louder now. Not just the crew, but everyone. Medics, mechanics, officers. They'd heard the radio. They'd expected death. Instead, they got a runway miracle. That night in the barracks, the story spread like wildfire. Crawford had flown backwards, landed tail first, saved his crew with a maneuver no one had trained for. No one had even considered. The nickname Backwards Tom, once a jab at his poker habits, now meant something else entirely. The man who bet reverse odds and won. But the story didn't stop there. In the weeks that followed, 3 more bomber crews survived crashes using the same maneuver. Hydraulics failed, landing gear wouldn't lock, and their pilots remembered. Crawford flew it backwards. The technique got a name: the Crawford reversal. It was written into emergency manuals, studied by engineers, taught in flight schools. And every time an instructor introduced it, they started the same way. They said it was impossible. They called him insane. But sometimes the impossible is just the solution nobody's tried yet. Crawford finished his tour. 30 missions. Rotated home to Montana. He never flew combat again. But his legacy lived in every pilot who trained on the Crawford reversal. Every airman who walked away from a crippled bomber because one man decided the rules were wrong. And proved it in the fog. November 12, 1944. The day a pilot flew backwards into history and showed the world that sometimes the winning move is the one nobody sees coming. 3 days later, the photograph appeared in Stars and Stripes. Crawford, standing beside his backwards bomber. The crew grinning like they'd just gotten away with murder. The headline read, "Pilot lands tail first, saves 9. But the photo that mattered most, the one that changed everything, never made the papers. It was taken that same afternoon by an engineering officer from right field, Captain Henry Morrison. He arrived at Woodbridge expecting wreckage. Instead, he found a bomber sitting on foam-covered gear at a 20-degree angle, intact, where every manual said it should have broken in half. Morrison spent hours with the aircraft. He measured everything: the skid marks in the foam, the angle of approach, the stress lines in the struts. Then he sat down with Crawford. 3 hours. No interruptions. He asked what Crawford had seen, what he'd felt, what he knew before the rest of the world caught up. Then Morrison did something unusual. He filed a formal report, not just documenting what had happened, but recommending it be studied, tested, added to official emergency procedures. The backlash was immediate. At 8th Air Force Headquarters, the idea landed like a grenade. Generals didn't want pilots inventing new procedures in the air. It created chaos. It questioned doctrine. And worst of all, it exposed the flaw in everything they'd taught. But Morrison's report was thorough, relentless in its logic. When a B-17 landed normally with compromised gear, the main wheels took the full weight, hitting the runway at 120 knots. The impact exceeded the design limits. Gear collapsed. The aircraft flipped. People died. But Crawford's reversal changed the equation. The tail will hit first. Light load, low stress. As the aircraft settled forward, friction bled off speed. By the time the main gear touched down, velocity had dropped to 60 knots. Half the force. The gear held. Not luck. Not miracle. Physics. Morrison circulated his findings across the European theater. Most commanders ignored it. Too unconventional. Too risky. But 3 bomber groups, the 91st, 305th, and 381st, paid attention. Pilots in those groups trained on it. Quietly. At altitude, they practiced. Simulated tail-first descents. Learned the feel of it. The unnatural sight of the sky shifting sideways. The aircraft sliding backward through air. And then, on December 23, 1944, 6 weeks after Crawford's landing, it happened again. A B-17 from the 91st Bomb Group lost hydraulics over Belgium. Fuel low. Gear unstable. Fog rolling in. Pilot, First Lieutenant David Chun. He'd read the report. He'd practiced the maneuver, twice, at 15,000 feet. Now he had a choice. Do what the manual said, or do what Crawford had done. Bail out over enemy territory, or try the impossible. Lieutenant David Chun made his decision. He flew backwards. December 23, 1944. RAF Bassingbourn. Tail-first approach. 8 men walked away. It worked. January 17, 1945. Another B-17. Another hydraulics failure. This time over northern France. Lieutenant Marcus Reed. He remembered Crawford's name from the reports. Reversed the approach at RAF Molesworth. 10 men survived. February 8, 1945. Lieutenant Thomas Yamaguchi. Same failure. Same maneuver. 9 men alive. 3 combat landings. 3 crews saved. This wasn't luck. It was replicable, teachable, life-saving. In March 1945, the U.S. Army Air Forces made it official. Emergency Landing Procedure 7B. Tail-first approach for hydraulic failure scenarios. The manual included Crawford's photograph, bombers skewed backwards in foam, Morrison's physics calculations, step-by-step instructions. Pilots called it the Crawford reversal. Engineers called it distributed impact landing. But everyone agreed on one thing. It worked. Crawford never flew combat again. 30 missions complete. He rotated stateside in January 1945, assigned to training duty at Randolph Field, Texas. They wanted him to teach the maneuver himself. He declined. "I'm not qualified to teach something I only did once." Crawford told his commander, "Get an instructor pilot who's practiced it." So they did. Captain James Holland, a test pilot from Wright Field, flew 40 tail-first landings under controlled conditions. He refined the technique, established safe parameters. Minimum altitude, 500 feet. Maximum crosswind, 15 knots. Gear, partially extended, unlocked. Approach speed, 90 knots. Descent rate, 300 feet per minute. Holland trained 20 instructors. Those instructors trained over 300 bomber pilots. By war's end, an estimated 1,500 Allied pilots had learned the Crawford reversal. 7 more used it in combat. 63 lives saved. But the story didn't end with the war. In 1947, civilian aviation engineers at the Civil Aeronautics Board began studying the maneuver for possible adaptation in commercial aircraft, cargo planes, long-range passenger flights, anywhere hydraulic failures could cripple a landing. The Crawford reversal had started as desperation, an impossible idea in a cold fog over England. But it became something more, a procedure, a training, a legacy, and in every pilot who flew again because of it. In every crew that walked away from a landing they weren't supposed to survive, Crawford flew with them. Could it work for commercial aircraft? Tests showed promise, in theory. For certain emergencies, gear malfunctions, zero visibility landings, it could save lives. But commercial airlines rejected it. Too radical, too risky. What would passengers think watching a jet swing sideways into a runway? So the Crawford reversal remained military only, a maneuver for extreme scenarios, a last resort when nothing else would work. Crawford's crew stayed together until war's end. All 9 men made it home. Jennings became a commercial pilot, flying DC-3s over the Midwest. Morrison taught mathematics at UCLA. Delgado opened a garage in Detroit. Kowalski worked construction in Chicago. Lou became a doctor in San Francisco. Henderson taught high school in Georgia. Washington ran a jazz club in Harlem. Ollie joined the Boston police force. Sterling wrote novels about the war, always changing names, always including the backwards landing. They held reunions every 5 years, always in Montana, at Crawford's ranch outside Billings. The final reunion came in 1993. Only 6 men attended. Crawford was 81. He still flew, an old Cessna 172 he'd bought in '68. Took it up once a week, weather permitting. Said it helped him think. Jennings asked, "Ever practice the reversal again? For old time's sake?" Crawford shook his head. Once was enough. Lightning doesn't strike twice. But it had. 7 times in combat. Dozens more in training. The maneuver Crawford invented out of desperation became doctrine. The impossible became procedure. And the man they'd once called insane became the one who'd saved lives by thinking backwards. The B-17 from that day, tail number 42 to 31,407. Rocky Mountain High, never flew again. The airframe was too badly stressed. The Army salvaged what they could. The rest was scrapped. But they kept the nose art. A mountain range above the clouds, painted in bright oils. Today, it hangs in the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Dayton, Ohio. Below it, a small metal placard. Simple. Factual. Unbelievable. This aircraft was landed tail first by First Lieutenant Thomas Crawford. November 12, 1944. Visitors read the sign. They pause. And then, almost always, they ask the same question. He really landed tail first? Yes, he really did. Crawford died in 2001, at the age of 89. Heart failure. But his legacy still flies. Quiet. Peaceful. The funeral was small. Family. A handful of old friends. 3 surviving crew members. No military honors. Crawford had refused them. "I was just doing my job," he'd say whenever someone called him a hero. But the Billings Gazette told the truth. It printed a story that spanned oceans and decades. A story about a pilot who broke every rule to save his crew. Who flew tail first through fog because no other option remained. Who bet reverse odds because sometimes the winning move is the one nobody expects. Innovation doesn't require permission, the obituary read. It requires courage. The final quote belonged to Jennings, Crawford's co-pilot. Tom taught me that rules exist until they don't. When you're out of options, you make new ones. That's not recklessness. That's survival. Today, the Crawford reversal is still taught in military flight schools. Modern aircraft have redundant hydraulics, fly-by-wire systems, fail-safes. Landing gear failures are rare. But the principle remains. When conventional methods fail, unconventional thinking saves lives. Young pilots learn the physics. They practice the maneuver in simulators. They study impact vectors, control surface response, descent rate versus drag profile. But more than that, they hear the story of a Montana farm boy, the son of a crop duster, who refused to accept the word impossible. November 12, 1944. The day laughter became silence. The day 8 condemned men walked away alive. The day one pilot proved that sometimes the impossible is just the probable nobody's tried yet. Because in war, survival doesn't always come from firepower or armor. Sometimes it comes from thinking differently. Crawford understood that instinctively. His poker strategy, betting reverse odds, reflected his flying philosophy. Everyone expected forward motion. But physics doesn't care about expectations. It only cares about force, about momentum, about angles. And Crawford learned to manipulate those things in ways no manual could teach. He succeeded where others would have perished. Not because he was lucky, but because he knew his aircraft intimately. 800 hours before combat, he knew how a B-17 moved, how it breathed in the sky, what it could do if you asked the impossible of it. And when the moment came, fog thick, fuel low, hydraulics gone, he didn't panic. He did what no one else had dared. He flew backwards. The November 12th landing wasn't Crawford's only contribution to aviation safety. It was just the one that rewrote the book. He'd suggested it quietly. No ceremony, no memo, just a note passed through maintenance channels. B-17 oxygen system, too slow. Masks hard to connect at altitude. Hands go numb. Lives get lost. Crawford recommended quick-release connectors. Simpler, faster, easier to use in the chaos of combat. By early 1945, the 8th Air Force had them on every bomber. Estimated lives saved? Unknown, but significant. And that was always the pattern. Crawford didn't seek recognition. He didn't pose for cameras. Didn't grant interviews. Didn't write a memoir. Talk to my crew, he'd say. They're the ones who trusted me. But every time the crew was asked, they said the same thing. We live because of Crawford. In 1987, Bombardier James Sterling finally wrote the story. His memoir was titled Fortress Winter. Panic, he wrote, makes you follow rules, even when those rules guarantee death. Crawford didn't panic. He followed physics. That difference between dying and living became doctrine. The Crawford reversal wasn't just an emergency procedure. It was a philosophy, adaptive thinking under pressure. Today, flight schools teach it not only as a maneuver, but as a mindset. When doctrine fails, adapt. When systems break down, reframe the problem. When the manual runs out of options, write a new one. By the year 2000, 93 lives had been saved by tail-first landings. Not just in the U.S., but in British, Canadian, and Australian squadrons. Each technique had evolved. Each credited a single date in history. November 12, 1944. Crawford's legacy didn't end with the military. Business schools began teaching his story. The case study, backwards thinking, innovation under constraints. Students learned how a Montana farm boy, a poker player, a pilot, used experience, instinct, and problem-solving to invent the impossible. He didn't ask, how do I land normally with damaged gear? He asked, how do I minimize impact forces, no matter what direction I'm flying? That simple reframing rewrote aviation safety. It taught a generation that failure of procedure doesn't mean failure of outcome. All 8 men who walked away from that fog-drenched landing carried Crawford's lesson into civilian life. Adapt, think differently, and never forget that sometimes the right answer is the one nobody's ever asked. They never pursued fame. They didn't write books or give speeches. But in the quiet lives across America, the men from Rocky Mountain High carried with them something powerful, a different way of thinking. When doors closed, they didn't stop. They found opportunities. When procedures failed, they relied on principles. Each man chose his own path. Jennings flew a DC-3 over the Midwest. Delgado ran an auto repair shop in Detroit. Lou practiced medicine in San Francisco. Washington ran a jazz club in Harlem. Sterling told their story, shrouded in fiction but grounded in truth. None became famous, but all succeeded. And everyone, believed that November 12th had taught them what no school could ever: resilience, adaptation, thinking outside the box. In a 1995 interview with Aviation History magazine, co-pilot Mike Jennings said it best: "Tom showed us that survival is not about following procedures. It's about understanding principles. Procedures are guidelines, but principles are universal. Master the principles, and you can improvise when guidelines break down." That's what helped us survive. These men had survived chaos. They had watched planes disappear in flames and fog, seen friends fall from the sky. And in those moments, they learned something most of us will never learn: that sometimes survival means going against the grain. That courage is the moment you refuse to accept that the impossible means certain death. Crawford's legacy is not just in emergency checklists, not just in simulators or training manuals, but in the lives saved by a single decision in the fog. He proved what few dare to believe: innovation saves lives. Principles trump procedures. And sometimes, the only way forward is to fly backwards.